Hey there YouTube, I'm Yukitsu, this is the Yukitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to some Battlefleet Gothic. So this is still in beta, but I've noticed that it's something that quite a decent number of people have started playing, and it's something that I've gotten into quite a bit, and it's something that I think that I can help some newer players out with. Now, I'm not actually that great at this game, but I am getting pretty good at it, especially with Eldar, but we'll get to them later. I wanted to just go over the basics of how to get into this game. If you're a complete newbie, what to sort of look out for, and how to sort of start out your fleet, and how to sort of manage it very, very early on. So, this is one of those games that's very, very tricky because of it's not necessarily clear how things work, and it's not clear, like, they give you sort of names and numbers, and they don't necessarily mean a whole lot to you. So, we're going to go ahead and start off by talking about the Imperial Navy, which is the most basic of the factions. So if we were to go ahead and take ourselves a look at these light cruisers that you're allowed to start off with, you start off with a restricted list of ships that you can select from. We've got the Dauntless and Dauntless Mark II. These are both light cruisers, of course. And when you start off, you sort of look at these and you think, well, what the hell's the difference between a Dauntless and a Dauntless Mark II? The only real difference between them is the fact that the Dauntless Mark I has a heavy prow lance and the Dauntless Mark II has a prow torpedo launcher. In fact, it's a prow medium torpedo launcher. So that's the only difference between these two different ships. And despite that, that actually leads to a pretty big difference in how they operate. If we were to look at the Dauntless over here, that prow lance does a lot of damage. It has a decent rate of fire compared to the prow torpedo launcher. Prow torpedo launcher has a rate of fire of 45. Once every 45 seconds it fires, whereas this one fires every 8 seconds. So the fact that the torpedo launcher is a skill shot is what makes them sort of really different. You can easily dodge those torpedo launchers, but if you're at close range and you manage to get those shots off, angle them really well, which is quite difficult actually, it does a lot more damage in a sudden burst. Lances have to deal with shields, but they can penetrate through and deal a lot of damage if they manage to get the chance and a good steady stream of fire. And they synergize really, really well with these light macro turrets and light macro batteries. So looking at these, you're probably thinking to yourselves, well, what the hell does that mean? Basically, these are just basic guns, and honestly, it's kind of obfuscated, but that's sort of how this game works. There's lots of different terms that don't necessarily mean anything to people, but the important things to look at are the number of attacks, the rate of fire, the damage, the range, and the angle of fire, and that's a lot of information. So basically everything here. Critical chances you can sort of ignore, but you need to know the engagement distance for your ship, and obviously for the Dauntless here you can see that it is, you want to be 6,000 or closer. And you mostly want your opponent to be on your broadsides unless for some reason you want to be firing your heavy prow lance. And typically the way that this ship works is you move in close to the enemy ship, you sort of advance towards them, firing the heavy prow lance, you get 1 or 2 shots off with that, and then you turn to face broadside. And what happens is you melt part of their shield off with the heavy prow lance, and then you start to get to work with the light macro battery and the double macro turret. And you can see that this actually fires both front and to the side. So this contributes to both the melting the shields and when you're starting to pound at the hull with the light macro battery. So that's how you sort of want this cruiser to work. The Dauntless Mark II, on the other hand, with its torpedoes, you kind of want to start off with a quick torpedo launch to try and hope for a couple of quick, easy hits. You turn to face the light macro battery, and then you sort of have to start working on the shields. And there's less synergy between these two weapon systems because the torpedoes actually ignore shields. They'll completely pass through shields without dealing any damage to them whatsoever, but they can deal that direct damage to the hull. That's not to say that torpedoes are necessarily bad, because you can deal a lot of damage if you get a good solid hit with them. But typically speaking, you actually want to be using your Dauntless regular one here with the heavy prow lance. It's more reliable and it synergizes better with the weapon systems in play here. In fact, there are very few times where torpedoes are actually a good weapon. The only time that you ever want to do that is when you see an enemy ship that has tons and tons of shields. Let's take a look at some of the other characteristics of these ships here. You can see that's got a hull integrity of 600, which is pretty good actually. Ships range from, of this size category, range from about 400. I believe orcs have like 800, but Eldar have 400. So this is a pretty middle of the road, slightly higher than average, I believe, since Chaos I think has 500. They've got 100 shields. They've got a speed of 188 and rotation speed of 15 degrees per second. Both of these statistics are quite bad for their class. They've got a detection radius of 5,000 units and a troop value of 69 turrets. Armor is 75 at the front, which is a very decent value, and their other armor values are 50. So these things are very durable ships. Not as durable as the Orcish ships, but they lack that sort of vulnerability getting fired at from behind. and they've got okay speed and rotation compared to an orc ship, but that's about it. Their weapon systems are designed primarily for getting in close with those light macro batteries and firing away broadside at an opponent. So we're going to go ahead and pick up a Dauntless here. And we're in fact going to get 2 Dauntlesses, and then we're going to get 1 Dauntless Mark II. Now, the Dauntless Mark II is almost exclusively for fighting against Eldar, so we're going to go ahead and deal with it first. We're going to go and take the support ability Taunt. Now, why are we getting Taunt on a ship at all here? Well, Taunt lets you fight Eldar. It forces them to target them. It moves directly towards the ship. What you can do is set the ship so that it's facing forward, go against the Eldar, wait until they're in a position where you can use Taunt and they're sort of in your front arc, launch your torpedoes while they're sort of dimly moving towards you, and then hit the ram button. And that sort of follow-up combo will basically one-shot an Eldar light cruiser. The Dauntless over here, we kind of don't want to worry about the same sort of things using this cruiser. We don't necessarily need to taunt or anything. I like to take Void Shield Transfer, which makes the fleet sort of just in general all around more durable. You're going to see me talking about the recon beacons for a lot of other ships, especially at this class. The recon beacons and the auger probes are very important for certain types of fleets, but it's not for the Imperial fleet because they're designed entirely to get in close, up personal, and just completely start bashing people with these light macro cannons that have relatively low range. Recon beacons are mostly for ships that want to keep their distance, and since you don't really need to, you don't need to invest in the recon beacon. You can use this for something else. So the Void Shield Transfer makes it so that when you do get up close and personal to the enemy, it really helps you deal that damage without taking damage in return, because you can sort of have your shields wank each other off at close range. And for that purpose, we're going to get both of our Dauntlesses with that particular effect there. So that's all of the starting things that you can sort of look at here. Now, you could look at things like crew favors and upgrades, but we can't actually use those yet, so we're not going to worry about those too much there. All we need to know is that this is a really solid setup for a first-time Imperial player. Of course, once you get better at the game, I think that it's perfectly fair to start fiddling around with other things, but a lot of these other abilities are highly situational, and there's going to be a lot of times where you wish that you just had something simple and straightforward like Void Shield Transfer. This is the only thing that's absolutely mandatory, because if you're fighting against Eldar, Taunt becomes a mandatory skill. There's no other way to deal with them. Let's look at lastly at the escort ships. I don't actually take very many escorts. I think that they're kind of bad, so typically you don't see me using them. But anyway, we've got the Cobra Destroyer here. As you can see, it's got those torpedo launchers just like the Dauntless Mark II, and it's got a light macro turret. It's got a decent rate of fire with okay damage, but these things only have a hull integrity of 100. Their armor values are 25 across the board. Their troop value is still 60, ironically, but they've got very, very little going for them. They're faster and more maneuverable, of course, but the fact that they die so easily typically means that you take them a couple of these out, and you think, well, the larger number of guns that I've gotten these will really sort of level things out and make it better for me. But what ends up happening is they get wiped from the board before they can deal any significant amounts of damage because they're so vulnerable and so light. Because of those low armor values. There are a couple factions that make exceptions to this, the Orcs and the Eldar in particular, but for the Imperial Navy, it's just not necessarily worth getting a bunch of these escort ships. They just are really, really weak. The Firestorm frigate here, if we look, it's got this light prow lance, and you can see that theoretically it'd be nice if this was an actual lance, but it's only got a damage rate of 6, and it's got a rate of fire of 6, so it fires much faster than the heavy prow lance. Well, not much faster, every shot that this one fires, you know, but it's still so fragile that it just goes down very, very quickly. This one does have higher armor than the Cobra, so if you wanted something that'll survive a couple hits, this actually will. So if you're going to get something, don't get the Cobra destroyers, but the one advantage of this though is that the torpedoes do full damage, so I guess there is that. But lastly, they've got the Sword frigate, which just has double light macro turret, which is really, really kind of poor. It's not a great weapon system here at all. It's kind of slower too. I mean, there's just nothing too good about this ship. It's got really low hull integrity and stuff like that. Honestly, I can't really figure out a great way to use these, but if, you know, people who play the game a lot, of course, are going to have various opinions and figure out ways to use these. And if they work for you, I recommend you take them, but almost invariably, I find it better to take another light cruiser instead of 2 of these escort ships. Just because you get more options with these guys. You've got these skills. You also get more upgrades, favors. You get the option to do boarding actions. You can't do boarding actions or lightning strikes with escorts, so it cuts out a lot of options, basically taking a lot of escorts. And if they get rammed, these things die basically instantly, even if the Eldar ram them. So they're extremely vulnerable. So yeah, that's pretty much an in-depth look into everything that you could conceivably start off with the Imperial Navy. I think that that's everything you probably need to know to start. So let's go ahead and hit search here, and I'll show you sort of an example. Now, there are exceptions to how you fight with these guys, and there are exceptions to how you fight with pretty much every faction, but the thing about the Imperial Navy is they're designed primarily for broadsides, and that's kind of what you want to be doing with them. Here we can see that we're up against another Imperial Navy player, so it's going to be a mirror match, and that means that rather than being an issue of, like, who's got better ships for that sort of thing, you know, I'm not even going to bring a Cobra Strike. I just think they're so useless here. We're going to go ahead. No, you know, we will bring it just for the sake of showing it. But it's going to come down to both of us using our broadsides as much as possible. It's going to be just a little bit down to luck, honestly. There's going to be us sort of lining up alongside each other, trying to hit each other, wear each other down as much as possible. But, you know, maybe my opponent took a lot of torpedoes and I'll be able to dodge those, whereas he can't dodge the lightning or the lances that I'm using. So there's a little bit to do with the fleet composition as well. But mostly it's going to come down to which of us gets the better broadsides, gets the better criticals, and, you know, maybe gets better angles of attack or something like that. So it's going to be a positioning game, but very, very close range, very much broadside to broadside kind of stuff, Napoleonic warfare almost in space. And neither of us has a lot of room to maneuver around that idea. We're both going to have to pretty much play to that sort of idea. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and make sure that we're set to broadside. Yeah, and we kind of actually want to be at 3k distance, although, you know, it doesn't really matter tremendously going ship to ship against the Imperials. Since we are going close range, we're going to go set our actions to boarding, and this means that we get more actions there. We get 2 assault actions as opposed to the lightning strike, which only gets 1. We're going to set our void shield transfer to on. We want that autocast as soon as we see an allied ship sort of in trouble there. We want that kind of getting that help that it needs there. We might be using reload or we might be using lock on, so we don't necessarily want to automate these. You right click these things to make them automatic, basically, and this makes the game much easier to play, but honestly a more skilled player is going to tell you that you want to be using those manually. So we're going to go ahead and hit start there. There's nothing really to do with this guy, so we're just going to ignore him for the time being. Actually, there's an asteroid field like right in front of me, so I'm just going to shuffle. Didn't notice that there. Anyway, we can see our opponent has sort of lined up in the back here. He's probably got 3 escorts and 1 cruiser, so this is going to put to the test my idea that cruisers are much better than escort ships. Alright, so he's also got a Cobra destroyer. We're going to go ahead and launch our own torpedoes in this general direction. But, I mean, both of us have no real chance of getting hit by these. One of the things that I dislike about these maps sometimes is that they do have very confusing backgrounds, in that it looks like there's asteroids here, but there's not. But then when you've actually got asteroids, it's a little bit hard to tell. So that's just part of the game, though.
Ship ready.
Alright, so let's move over this way.
Your orders.
You just want to sort of swoop out of the line of fire of these sort of torpedoes, and he's going to do the same, and there's neither of us is going to get hit by them, so it's not really anything you need to worry about. Alright, so what's going to happen here is he's moving up rapidly, I think, with his Cobra destroyer. Let's go ahead and launch these as well. Just keep launching those torpedoes, see if we can make him
Understood. Your orders?
I think I want to kind of split like this. Maybe that was a bad idea. Maybe I should have just kept on that heading that I had already. Yeah, probably. I think we'll just slip past it. Oh, got shot down by my defensive turrets anyway. Anyway, we're going to park our Cobra destroyer over there. Let's see if we can get up to this guy. Maybe not. Probably not. Actually, so we'll head towards these guys here.
Understood.
See what he's got. We won't be able to see what they've got, and we won't be able to fire at them until we close range, so let's go ahead and let's switch this guy to front facing.
Your orders?
Alright, so
enemy ship sighted. Changing course. Yes, Admiral. Awaiting orders.
We void shield transferred on both of our ships here. Done lots of boarding actions. I think
Orders received.
we're doing pretty okay here. Our generators got blown up, which is really bad, actually.
Engines
I don't think we've
hot.
managed to do anything with our boarding actions either.
Helm coordinates
But,
acknowledged.
yeah, with that particular critical, we've lost our shields, basically.
Ship ready.
Still, we've managed to take out basically one of their escorts, it looks like.
Awaiting orders. Course plotted.
Yep, that's one of their escorts down.
Awaiting orders.
Alright, so let's go ahead and hit
Damage
repair
trains
already.
Begin repairs now. Your orders.
Let's get this
Changing
Cobra
course.
destroyer repaired so it's not on fire anymore, and let's launch these torpedoes.
Setting course.
Oh, looks like one of the torpedoes got shot down, but we got a hit with the other
At
one.
your command. We are the Imperial Navy.
Let's go ahead and target his generators just as a payback sort of thing.
Yes, Admiral.
Alright, my Cobra destroyer here is going to get completely wrecked, but you know what, that's fine.
Brace
Brace for
for
impact with
impact.
it, just for the hell of it.
At your command.
And we're going to try and ram one of these little ships here.
At your command. Underway. Changing course.
There we go.
Cruising speed set. Engines hot. Ship ready.
Oops,
Setting course.
that's not going to do. Alright, so we
Helm
can't do void
coordinates
shield transfers
acknowledged.
anymore, which is really unfortunate, but it is the way of things. I think that guy actually went closer to my ship's torpedoes there.
Understood. Awaiting orders.
Let's go ahead and use
Underway.
repair on that ship there. Now my opponent at this point in time is pretty in trouble.
Orders received.
Gonna do a ram here.
Cruising speed set. Course plotted.
My opponent is trying to get out of the fight
Your
here.
orders. Ship ready.
Oops, I think I just about torpedoed my own ship there.
Understood. Cruising speed set.
Let's try and get around here as
Your
best as we
orders.
can. We've lost a couple systems on this ship, but that doesn't really matter that much. Looks like my opponent has blown up there, so yeah, we definitely had the advantage in punching in a... Oh, he blew up our Escort. But yeah, you can see that definite advantage in punching strength just from having, instead of more escorts, having more cruisers. Having that extra cruiser meant all the difference in terms of durability as compared to having more escorts. And that's kind of the way the game is. You kind of want more durable ships that can deal that damage over a more sustained period of time. Otherwise, you know, you pick away a couple escorts, you destroy a couple escorts, one or two of them, or force them to flee, and then you focus down whatever's left after you've got that advantage. So even though one of my ships got a very, very unlucky crit against it very early on, we did manage to pick up an easy win there. So here we're going to go ahead and show you, though, what happens when you level up. So let's go ahead and take a look at this, because this leads you to consider a lot more in-depth things that this game has to offer in terms of its leveling that might be a little bit overwhelming to your typical player. So for both of our Dauntless cruisers, we want them to be as durable as possible. We want them to be as punchy as possible. We want to get in close. We want to use those broadsides. So we're going to take a look at upgrades here. And what we can see are a lot of different icons here. And they can be a little bit overwhelming, but when you're playing this and you're sort of new, just know that the important things for these sorts of ships is durability and their macro batteries on the sides there. They've only got one lance, and as good as that lance is, it's not going to be the one that finishes off fights, it's going to be those macro batteries. So you can definitely get stuff like armor-piercing ammunition, but honestly, I don't think that that sort of stuff is necessary. I think that when we look at the stats on these things, like, they deal enough damage on those broadsides that they'll get the job done. And most ships that you face, barring Imperial ships firing at the front of them using your broadsides, which you should never really be doing anyway, you'll typically be facing armor values 50 or lower. So that's not really hugely necessary. You don't need huge armor penetration capabilities. I mean, it is nice since it basically doubles your damage when you're in close range, but it never feels like it's necessary to me. What I like taking most of the time is the additional void shield generator because it doubles the amount of shields that this type of ship has. For larger ships, that's not necessarily as good of an upgrade. If we look at our stats here, we've got 100 shields here. Larger ships have 200 by default or even more. So when we take the extra void shield generators on a light cruiser, we're doubling the amount of shields value that that ship has. And that is massive. That basically makes it ridiculously hard. Combined with the skill void shield transfer, that means that we've essentially got 300 shields on a light cruiser, which is very, very hard to tear through. The other thing that we want to look at is crew. And we can ignore some of these, and I recommend that you ignore the commissar, you ignore the navigator, you even ignore the tech priest. But these three and the squadron sergeant, if you happen to have a carrier, are all things that you want to sort of consider and look at. Now, what ratings do is they improve the troop value of the ship, and troop value is important for boarding actions, both when you're boarding the enemy and for repelling all forms of boarding actions against you, assault actions against you. Your troop value is not used for lightning strikes, but it is used to defend against lightning strikes. It's also used for assault boats, for and for boarding actions. So it's both an offensive stat and a defensive stat, and it prevents critical systems from being damaged in those events. So it's a very, very important statistic, the troop value. So for ships that you suspect are going to get boarded a lot, going to get lightning striked a lot, and where you really don't want those critical systems to be damaged by boarding actions or by assault boats or whatever, then ratings is what you want to be getting. Master Gunner, on the other hand, is the opposite end of that. It improves the 25% chance, the critical chance of lances and macro weapons per level. So every time you take this, you become much more likely to cause a critical damage to one of those systems by using your weapons. The last one are the servitors, which are reduce the cooldown time of all skills by 4% per level. Personally, I wouldn't ever get that on a Dauntless because they don't rely on their skills that much. So I like to get the Master Gunner because if you can disable enemy ships, it makes it much, much easier to deal with them and just keep blasting away at them while they're sort of Hulk drifting in space as you just sort of blow away at them. Ratings are the other thing that I think is good on a Dauntless type cruiser. And so we're going to go ahead and also go and pick up our extra void shield generator. Going to do the same on our other Dauntless, and I think that these are just strong, basic first upgrades to get on Imperial ships. So if you're a new player, these are very reliable ways to upgrade your ship. So this kind of setup, it's not the most creative and it's not the most interesting, but just use this until you sort of figure things out a little bit more. The other thing to look at that I haven't managed to afford yet is favors. Now, favors are a very expensive thing. You can see that even for a light cruiser it costs 200, and it gets radically more expensive for the larger ships. But these are interesting and unique support abilities that your ships can have if you've got enough renown for that. So the Inquisition here gives you the Emperor's Tarot, which allows you to automatically identify an enemy ship. It basically is a line of sight, but since we don't need to really identify long-distance ships, that doesn't matter tremendously to us. The other thing that we can do is the Inquisitorial Suit. That basically gives us one free crew in each of these things. So if you're going to get the Inquisitors, don't max out Master Gunner or whatever, just leave one tick away, because otherwise you'll waste it once you get the Inquisitorial Suite. So definitely don't want to worry about that if you're going to get the Inquisition. Adeptus Mechanicus, if we look here, it gives you one extra upgrade slot and one extra skill slot for the ship, which is actually a really, really interesting bonus. It used to be discount on upgrades and skills, but I like this a lot better. Getting an extra upgrade can make your ship much more versatile, much more durable, or much more punchy, any of those things. And an extra skill is just so good in so many situations, being able to get, for example, just a random stasis bomb on a ship that already has void shield transfer, or even something like ridiculous like emergency capacitor or supercharged void shield on something like a light cruiser in conjunction with the void shield transfer. That combination could make your ships really ridiculously tanky, although I believe void shield supercharged void shield got nerfed quite heavily. But yeah, so between those two, you could end up with some really interesting combinations, and that's sort of how you unlock more interesting ships, is by taking the Adeptus Mechanicus. More customizable ships is through the Adeptus Mechanicus. I actually quite like their ship color pattern as well. The next one is the Imperial Navy. Theirs is interesting. You get reinforcements. You get to call a Cobra class escort ship every 3 minutes, basically. So every 3 minutes you basically call in a Cobra, which is really kind of weird. Most games don't last long enough for that to really make a huge difference, though, so they're not actually a great card. You've also got Rigor, which means the ship is immune to insubordination. Honestly, I think the Imperial Navy bonus is by far the weakest, so I would never recommend taking that. The last one is the Adeptus Astartes, which is the Space Marines. You've got Terminator Lightning Strike, which basically replaces your Lightning Strike. It is exactly the same as a Lightning Strike, don't get me wrong, but it replaces it. It means that instead of one boarding action when you hit Lightning Strike, you get two, and that's about it. The other effect that it has is you get an additional 10 troop value, and you get an additional assault action during boarding. So if we look at the stats here, actually I can't remember how to check how much boarding actions do for these guys, but I believe that this ship has 2 boarding actions. So it would deal 3 if you had the Adeptus Astartes upgrade, or 2 from a Lightning Strike. So you still want to do boarding when you can, but especially because with that you'd end up with a 70 troop value, which is a very beefy number. Extremely powerful ship if you do it that way. So yeah, that's sort of the different customizations you can do. I actually think that my favorite is the Adeptus Mechanicus one, but it really varies depending on what you want to do. You won't be able to afford these for quite some time. By the time you've got the 200, you'll actually have access to a cruiser, which is a much better version of one of these ships, but we're not going to worry about that. If you're a completely new player, this is what you're going to sort of have to play with. And I think that, I've really sort of done as much as I can to sort of help you. But yeah, I hope you found this video informative, and of course, as always, I hope to see you all next time.